The top stories live from the Sky News City studio. A small increase in the unemployment rate while pay growth rises faster than expected. A surprise rebound for the Chinese economy as it opens up after COVID restrictions. A new code of conduct for energy firms with the forced installation of prepayment meters banned for over 85s. Plus, the rise of AI, how artificial intelligence is taking over everything from healthcare to holiday bookings. Good morning, this is Ian King Live in our business and economic news from the heart of the city. Now, the UK unemployment rate rose unexpectedly during the 3 months to February, but wages are continuing to grow at a faster rate than expected, according to figures published this morning by the Office for National Statistics. There was also a drop in the so-called inactivity rate as more people returned to the workforce. Well, the UK's unemployment rate rose to 3.8% during the 3 months to February. That was up from 3.7% in the previous quarter. Total pay, including bonuses, grew at an annual rate of 5.9% in the same period. That was unchanged from the figure for the 3 months to January and better than economists had expected. Meanwhile, the employment rate rose from 75.6% to 75.8%, thanks to an increase in both full and part-time self-employed workers. The number of job vacancies slipped by 47,000, but still remains north of 1 million at 1.105 million. Well, with me now is Raoul Rapal. He's the director of the Centre of Growth at Boston Consulting Group. Raoul, welcome to you. I mean, the picture is really one of a very tight labour market, isn't it?
Yeah, well, it's definitely a mixed picture. We see the employment stats being strong, so that's good for the economy overall. It suggests a recession is less likely. But as you say, labour market remains very tight, employment growth is high. And while we see inactivity coming off, which I guess will be a positive, it's not really in the areas that people want to see. You know, it's driven by students going back into the workforce, not by people no longer being on long-term sick, which remains very high. Retirees remains very high. So I think, you know, it is a mixed picture. On the whole, good for the economy, but really showing a tight labour market, suggesting inflation may stay high for longer, and also, you know, in the long term, is that going to hit supply and output?
Yeah, it's those wages numbers that have really caught the eye, isn't it? I mean, I guess this is what the Monetary Policy Committee is going to latch on to. Yeah,
well, I think we've seen a real evolution in the Bank of England's view of the labour market over the past 3-4 months. You know, originally I think they expected it to loosen quite quickly at the start of this year with the economic outlook, but actually the latest monetary policy report suggests that they're starting to think, well, actually it's going to remain tighter for longer and wage growth will remain higher, and I think this will reinforce that concern, and so it'll be interesting to see at their next decision. I think this really puts it up in the air over whether they will continue to increase rates, so they will be concerned by that wage growth. The one sort of silver lining, I guess, is that there is some moderation in private sector pay, so you know that might give them a sense it is starting to ease. And I think if you look at the Bank of England agents, they are finding some evidence of sort of easing behind the scenes, but we're not yet seeing that in the data.
Yeah, why do you think wages growth has remained higher than expected? I mean, is it just the fact that there are these skill shortages in very pockets of the economy?
Yeah, I think so. Look, we did a survey of 1,500 UK business leaders at the start of February, and you know, 77% said they were going to raise their workforce or keep it the same. You know, and that was when they're at 75% and expect a recession. So you know, I think firms just find it so hard to find the skills, find the workers. They've had a really difficult couple of years. They also think any kind of downturn is going to be relatively short or mild, and so they're very unwilling to lay people off and not be able to find those skills again. So I think we are seeing a lot of labour hoarding across the economy, and that's really contributing to this wage growth. And there's also all the other areas they're competing as well beyond just wage growth. You know, training, improved packages, flexible working, all those kinds of things.
I mean, that for me has been the story of the last few months. Not only has the fact that the economy has been more robust than a lot of people thought it would be in the autumn, but it's also the fact that with inflation, a lot of people are just sucking it up, whether that's consumers to businesses. Everyone is just absorbing it rather than trying to pass it on or pushing back at it, if you like.
Yeah. I mean, I think we've seen, particularly with the strength of retail sales, strength of the consumer. It is surprising that that's continued given the level of inflation. And I think particularly, you know, with the wage rises, when we look back at what real wages have done over the past 15 years, they've been almost stagnant. So you can understand now why people are pushing hard to continue to see the wage rises they want. But you know, at some point, that difficulty of that high inflation, you know, where it will bite, and it's going to be interesting. But you know, firms are being squeezed as well when they see these nominal wage rises and around, the higher input costs and profit margins being hit.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that is very clear from the ONS numbers is that the gap between public and private sector pay is ever widening. Does that make it harder for the government to hold the line against these sort of wage demands that we're seeing in the NHS?
Well, I think actually in the latest data, what we've seen is that gap has closed quite significantly. Public sector pay has been growing quite rapidly the last few months, and private sector has been moderating a little bit. So it's at the smallest level in terms of the gap since I think the start of since pre-COVID almost. We are seeing that change, and I think that is a result of what we're seeing with the negotiations and some of the pay settlements in the public sector. So I think it'll be interesting to track that over time, but it may have a material impact as things develop. And in terms of these negotiations, ultimately this is a lot about supply and demand and what workforce is there, and public sector is, like everywhere else, struggling for those numbers.
Yeah, you made a really interesting point just now about the inactivity rate. I mean, the government wants to see over 50s workers returning to the labour force. As you say, it seems to be 16 to 24-year-olds.
Yeah, I mean, look, anyone coming back into the labour force at the moment is welcome. In terms of the size of the labour force, we're still 400,000 to 500,000 below where we'd expect it to be. Anyone coming back in is good. But I think the government is really targeting those retirees who have gone out of the labour force because they felt wealthier. And that is a really hard trend to reverse. We saw some measures in the budget recently, but I'm sceptical they'll really have the impact. And then the big one is long-term sick, the backlogs in the NHS. And I think, people really want to see those start coming down. I think we're the only country post-COVID that's seen that massive increase and sustained increase. And I think the government is really targeting those two groups. So while they'll welcome the students coming back into the labour force, I think the other two groups are the ones they really want to focus on. And that will be how they're judged in terms of whether they're having the right labour market policies, I think.
All right, Raoul, got to leave it there. Really good to see you this morning. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Some other business news stories for you now. And the energy regulator Ofgem has tightened its rules on when energy suppliers can install prepayment meters. Ofgem's new code says that prepayment meters, which are installed when a customer is in debt to avoid them amassing higher bills, may not now be put in the homes of those aged over 85 or with severe health conditions. The new code also states that £30 credit should also be given when a meter is forcibly installed to prevent the risk of households being immediately cut off. The drugs giant GSK is buying a Canadian company working on a treatment for refractory chronic cough. GSK is paying £1.6 million for Bellus Health, which is based in Laval, Quebec. The company has been developing a product called Camlipixant, which GSK said was a potential best-in-class cough treatment. Well, Camlipixant is currently in development for so-called phase 3 trials, which is the last hurdle that a drug being developed must jump before regulatory approval is sought. It's been 6 decades since the last cough treatment was approved in the United States, and currently there are no approved treatments available in the US for patients suffering from refractory chronic cough. If you're having trouble deciding where to go for your next holiday, have you considered using a chatbot to help you decide? Well, the online and app-based travel service Expedia is developing a tool that claims to do just that, using ChatGPT to give recommendations on where to go and what to do. Well, Peter Kern is the Chief Executive and Vice Chairman of Expedia Group, and he joins me now. Peter, welcome to you. This is only in beta testing phase at the moment, I think. When do you anticipate a full launch?
Well, we're still testing it, but it is out and available in the English language on our apps in iOS. So if you have an iOS phone, you can get it now in the UK, you can get it in the US, Australia, anywhere. So in English, we're testing it, and we're rolling it out. We'll roll it out to other devices, we'll roll it out to other countries and languages as we develop it.
Now, the demonstrator video that you put out, I mean, it shows a chatbot answering questions about travel destinations and responding with hotel information. Will there be more to it than that over time?
Well, the basic idea is that people can use ChatGPT for planning. So imagine you want to know if Paris is nice in the spring and what's, where you should go near the Eiffel Tower and what's to do or what hotel to stay at. It's really a planning device that goes on top of our app. So it allows you to essentially get those kinds of questions answered and zero in on your plan. Over time, we expect to use it in other ways, potentially to help service and other things, but really it's a separation between the idea of planning, using these kinds of AI tools, and then doing the rest of your trip planning through our devices, which are enabled by lots of AI, but not ChatGPT. We use a lot of machine.
So it's complementary rather than replacing it.
Exactly right.
Essentially, right. And I mean, you obviously want to make travel more personalised, and this is a way towards doing that. What about data sharing?
Yeah, we don't share the data. So just to be clear, ChatGPT can have their conversations with you. The only thing we abstract from that is really if you ask about a hotel or a group of hotels near the Eiffel Tower and it recommends 3, we will save those for you and then you can go look at those. But we're not taking your conversation from ChatGPT, nor are we giving them data on you as a traveler. So really, again, this is a way to get you into discovery. And then we have lots of personalized capabilities through our products to help you find the right thing at the right time, at the right price, et cetera.
One thing that I commonly hear about chatbots is that they're desperate not to cause offence. I mean, to take your Paris example, one thing that would unnerve me about Paris is there's lots of pickpockets. If I ask the chatbot about that, would it necessarily light on that?
Well, I think it will answer, the chatbots, ChatGPT and other chat that will come along for sure, is taking the world's information. So if there's information on pickpockets in Paris, which I'm sure there are articles and other things that have been written, it will give you that information. But again, it's not about not taking offense. It's really about, is it answering a travel question? And one of the things we've done is we've written our own algorithms to make sure that the answers it gives you are travel related. We're not interested in its political opinions or its love life suggestions. We only want to help you make travel decisions. So if you get into a strange conversation with it, we will guide it back to travel. And that's our part in that.
And how else are you using AI to enable what you do more broadly?
Yeah, we've used AI for years. We use it to help you search better. We use it to show you the right pictures. We use it to create products like we have now for intelligent shopping to help match you with the right product, or even price tracking for watching flight prices move and suggest when the best time to buy is. So we have AI and machine learning throughout the experience, and a huge investment in the service side to make it easier for you to serve problems if something happens, there's a cancellation, a flight delay. So we've been using AI for a long time, but this new latest version of large language models, which everyone's all excited about with ChatGPT and others coming, that's a particular kind of AI that's really around the use of natural language. And that has a lot of interesting uses, but we view it as just another tool to help make the experience better.
And more broadly, what are you seeing in the business right now? Clearly, we've got a trading update from EasyJet this morning. Very, very strong demand there. You must be seeing that everywhere.
Yeah, travel demand has remained quite strong. You were just talking about, inflation worries and recession worries. Travel has seemed to hold up above all other things. Maybe a legacy of COVID when people still are now putting travel ahead of all other things in terms of what they're willing to spend on. But summer demand is very strong. We haven't really seen a let up anywhere in the world. And Asia's opening up, so that's driving a whole other burst of interest and excitement. So I think we're going to see travel hold up relatively well compared to everything, and right now it's very strong.
Obviously, you're here in Europe, and it's great to see you. But the US is the real driver for Expedia, isn't it? It's a real motor.
It is our
growth.
Biggest market, yeah. But the rest of the world's important to us too. I was in Asia 2 weeks ago. Japan's opening up. It was the first time the cherry blossoms were available to the world again post-COVID, and all the hotels were full. The world is really filling up, and big cities are filling up like London.
American tourists have always been vital for the European tourism economy. Are Americans back in force?
Oh, yeah. Americans are back. I'm sure you're seeing it in the London restaurants, but I saw it in airports everywhere. Americans are back. But I'd say Europeans are back certainly in Asia. You're seeing Chinese in Japan. Like, everyone's going back to where they used to go as soon as they can, and it's really booming again. So I think you're going to see a busy summer. If you enjoyed the COVID summers when it was a little quieter, it's not going to be like that.
Absolutely. But in terms of Chinese travellers, how quickly do you expect them to return to pre-COVID levels?
We've still got a ways to go. There's not enough airlift between China and other countries yet direct. There are issues flying over Russia still. From the West. So there's some challenges that are evolving, but we're seeing lots of interest from out of China into China. We're seeing lots of searches in China to go other places. And I think as the airlift comes back, you'll start to see a lot more Chinese. So probably the back half of the year, you'll see a lot more.
Before I let you go, the interesting thing about Expedia is that you have an absolute multiplicity of brands. Trivago, Expedia itself, Vrbo. Do you have
Hotels.com.
Exactly. Do you have too many brands?
Well, we like to think we have a brand to serve every need. So Expedia is really for trips that are big trips, complicated trips, air, hotel, maybe a rental car, et cetera. Hotels.com is usually for the quicker trip. You going to Paris for the weekend, need a hotel. more like that. And then Vrbo is our other big brand, which is really for vacation rentals for longer, larger group trips. So that's kind of how we think about it. We have some other complementary brands, but that's our view of it, that we kind of have an app for anything you need. And we serve any of your travel needs. And we like to think we're the broadest travel provider in the world, and certainly the technological leader, which is what we're trying to do with AI. So that's what we try to provide to consumers.
And where's your next stop in Europe?
Actually, I'm headed back to the States after a long trip away, and I'll be back there and then back here in June again.
Well, we wish you Godspeed. Peter, good to see you this morning.
Thanks very much. Good to see you.
Some other business news stories for you now. And as I was hinting just now, shares of EasyJet have risen by 3.25% this morning after the airline said it expected full-year profits to be better than expected. The carrier said this reflected strong bookings both over Easter and into the peak summer period. EasyJet said that during Easter it had been running around 1,600 flights per day, with 99.8% of planned flights operating despite disruption caused by striking air traffic controllers. Well, during the 3 months to the end of March, EasyJet carried 15.6 million passengers, which was up 35% on the same period last year. Profits for the year are now expected to come in at £260 million. The e-commerce group THG, the Hut Group, has reported an operating loss for the final 6 months of last year, £496 million. That was up from one of £137 million during the same period in 2021. Well, that was mainly due to one-off accounting charges and reorganisation costs. Sales during the period rose by 2.7% to £2.2 billion. Well, the news comes a day after the company, which specialises in direct-to-consumer sales of beauty and nutrition products, said it had received a takeover proposal from the private equity firm Apollo. Well, on yesterday's programme, we covered the start of the Innovate Finance Global Summit, a gathering of major banks, regulators, fintechs, policymakers and investors for a series of discussions on the future of the finance and banking sector. One of the central themes is the future of money and payments and the advent of digital currencies, both cryptocurrencies and those issued by central banks like the Bank of England. Well, with me now is Marion Labor. She is the macro strategist at Deutsche Bank. Marion, great to see you this morning. You're appearing on a panel later on today, which is going to be discussing central bank digital currencies. How quickly do you expect them to become commonplace?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a good question. And today, just to give you a big picture idea, we have around 90% of central banks which are working on CBDC, central bank digital currency. So that's a huge topic. And the question is probably no longer whether or not we'll get CBDC, but when. In the world, we have already few central banks which have launched their CBDC. So, for example, the Bahamas, Eastern Caribbean, Nigeria. China is still officially in pilot mode, but it's accessible for everyone in China. So definitely the question is no longer whether or not, but when it's coming. In Europe and in the US, we are slightly behind probably the emerging countries. If we have a CBDC, it's not yet decided, but it might be in the middle of the 2020s. So probably 26 for the ECB, if we have one.
If we have one. Well, it sounds like you think we will. I mean, will these currencies be able to exist alongside cryptocurrencies?
Absolutely. And I think the way we should see it, there are a couple of reasons why central banks have been speeding up their effort for CBDC. The first one is probably because cash in circulation has been declining in terms of longer trend, but also in terms of the shorter trend because it has been very quick thanks to the pandemic, to the COVID pandemic. Just to give you an idea, for example, a country like Sweden is kind of considered as a cashless country, given that cash represents less than 1% of GDP.
It's very interesting, though, the fact that some countries still cleave to cash a lot more. I mean, in Germany, for example, it's still quite a cash-driven economy.
Absolutely. And Germany is very well known because German people are relying heavily on cash, like in Japan as well, like in the US. But the idea of CBDC is more to complement cash, not to replace cash. And central banks have made it very, very clear that the idea is not to replace cash, but it will be issued as a complement of cash.
Do you think that central banks, they're all working very hard on CBDC. Do you think they'd like to stifle innovation in cryptocurrency? I mean, we've had one or two central bankers saying that they fear that it poses a risk to financial stability, for example.
Yeah, that's definitely true. And if we look at what happened in terms of research, in terms of announcements, so basically central banks have been looking at the issue of CBDC since 2014. So in 2014, the PBOC, the Central Bank of China, was the first bank to look at this topic. But the research has definitely sped up in 2019 when Facebook did the big announcement of Libra Gem. And since then, the effort has clearly accelerated. Of course, we had like few announcements about crypto, about stablecoin, cryptocurrency reached a peak in November 21 when Bitcoin reached around like 68K.
Does the PBOC, the People's Bank of China, gain any sort of first mover advantage from launching this so quickly?
I wouldn't say there is a first mover advantage, but definitely they have been looking at this issue. And what is fascinating in terms of central bank digital currencies, like central banks have different motivation to look at this topic. So for example, for the PBOC, I would say that the motivation is more to find an alternative to cash, physical cash, because it has been a cashless society, a cash society where people are using cash on a day-to-day transaction as well, but also for financial inclusion. I mean, a CBDC may not need to be linked to a bank account. So it's one way to make sure people are inserted in the financial society.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be a revolution in payments. The fact that we could be sitting here and we can just ping money to each other all day long to our heart's content.
Absolutely. And the Chinese society is already there, and they have been paying like digitally for at least 15 years now. If you look at Alipay, WeChat Pay, I mean, most transactions are digital in China already.
Yeah. Now, what about cryptocurrencies? I mean, we had Brian Armstrong from Coinbase on the programme this time yesterday, and there's been a real rally in crypto values this year. I mean, Bitcoin's up 80% so far this year. What do you think's behind that?
That's a good question. And actually, if you look at the long-term trend, so today we are around 30K for Bitcoin, $30K. So it's pretty high if you look at the long-term history. 5 years ago, one Bitcoin, it was $1,000. So yes, it's definitely lower than at the peak in November 21, but still 30 times more than 5 years ago. Now, if we look at the shorter-term trend, what happened during the COVID pandemic, price surge for cryptocurrency, for most of them, by the way, but it was due to abundant liquidity. Interest rates were very low. Traditional investors were looking for additional yield. Now we are in a very different context. Inflation is very high. Interest rates have been surging. Liquidity has been lowered compared to what it was early during the COVID. So cryptocurrency price have declined significantly, but during the year they have increased again. And it's very fascinating because I would say that Bitcoin is probably the North Star.
Yes.
Ethereum, it's fascinating on what is happening in terms of the Ethereum. Again, it's the second cryptocurrency in terms of market cap, widely used for all the use cases like DeFi, for example. And Ethereum has been undergoing like several upgrades since September the merge.
And this is the amazing thing. Whenever we cover crypto on the programme, it really polarises people. You get people who absolutely love it and say, this is fantastic, great you're doing this. And then you get other people who say, this is all snake oil, it's really not to be tampered with. I get the impression from talking to you, you think that it's here to stay. It's going to be a permanent fixture in the sort of payments and cash and money landscape.
I think it's here to stay. Not all of them, because again, we have a lot of different cryptocurrency. We have like around 15,000 cryptocurrency, depending how you count them. I would say that Bitcoin and Ethereum are clearly going to coexist and that they are here to stay. For most of them, I'm not sure.
All right, that's a good note on which to end. Marion, lovely to see you this morning. Thank you.
Thank you.
Still to come here on Ian King Live. We're going to have a look at how the markets are doing this Tuesday morning. Don't go away.
Prepare to be made aware of the tale of the most successful Labour Premier. And his name it was told
Well, it's a great story. It's operatic in many ways in its scale, because you start with basically a sort of peace-loving hippie. He's at Oxford, he's got the long hair, he's in a band. You know, he idolises Mick Jagger, and then he becomes, as you say, Labour's most successful Prime Minister, landslide victories, swept to victory on a huge sort of well of hope and excitement. You've got the turn of the millennium, you've got Britpop, you know, England is swinging once again, and then he has a little problem in the Middle East, basically. I mean, and the whole thing goes... It is a comedy. I mean, there's a lot of stuff in that. You think, well, it's not suitable for comedy. But in many ways, it's not about Tony. It's the sort of message of it is, if there is one, is do we ever get the leaders that we deserve?
And what is your conclusion to that?
Well, I can't sing you the final song because there are rude words in it, but we're sort of saying that a lot of... We seldom get the leaders we deserve. We tend to end up with people who are, well, egomaniacs. All the information's there. It's not a history lesson. You know, we have got, you saw from the clip, there's a lot of slapstick. There's some big characters from that time.
Go on, I mean, who are we going to see in the show?
Well, you've got Tony, you've got Prescott, who've, you know, obviously famously punched a voter.
Yes, part of that one.
You've got David Blunkett, you've got Princess Diana, you've got those real baddies, you've got, or, you know, portrayed as baddies, Saddam Hussein and Osama bin Laden. Obviously, this stuff requires a very light touch.
Well, the pound is higher on foreign exchange markets this morning as those stronger wages growth, higher than expected, raised the prospect of further interest rate rises from the Bank of England. Sterling currently ahead by nearly 0.5% against the US dollar. It's more or less unchanged against the euro right now. The single currency, meanwhile, is up 0.2% against the greenback. Well, on the equity markets, following last night's gains on Wall Street last night, the Asia-Pacific region saw mixed trading overnight, and that was despite news that China's economy grew by 4.5% during the first 3 months of the year. That was better than the 4% that had been expected. Shanghai, Mumbai and Sydney all finished lower, while there were gains in Hong Kong. The Nikkei in Tokyo, meanwhile, that was a star turn again. It rose for an 8th straight session, which is its longest-running streak since March last year. Well, in Europe, stocks are trading largely higher this morning. Here's the current picture. All of the continental European indices in positive territory right now. Talking points in Europe today include Airbus. It's off 1.75% in Paris after it warned customers of possible delays to deliveries of single-aisle aircraft next year. Well, here in London, the FTSE 100 is up 0.25% right now. The mining heavyweights have been cheered by that better-than-expected GDP data from China. The Mexican silver miner Fresnillo is the leading blue-chip gainer right now. In percentage terms, that's on the back of some supportive broker comment. The share's up nearly 4.5% right now. Other bleeding gainers in the FTSE this morning include the gaming group Entain. The share's ahead by some 2.25% on a trading update. The index as a whole is currently on course for its 8th straight gain. Outside the FTSE, again, there's an awful lot going on. The outsourcing group Mighty, the share's up more than 12% right now. That's on news that profits for the year are going to be better than expected, while Volex, the power and data transmission products group, is ahead by some 17% for similar reasons. But the money transfer group Wise is off by 11% after warning of lower transaction volumes per customer. As for the oil price, well, that sold off sharply yesterday and it's continued to drift this morning despite that Chinese economic data. A barrel of Brent crude will currently set you back $84.52 a barrel. That is off 0.25% on the session. But with me this morning is Guy Ellison. He's head of listed equities at Investec Wealth. Good to see you, Guy. We should start, I guess, with the Chinese GDP number.
Yes, a very strong print from the Chinese GDP for the first quarter. They printed 4.5% growth year on year. The market had been expecting around 4%. Not a complete surprise. Those more real-time economic indicators that we get in the form of the purchasing manager indices, the PMIs, they've been suggesting that both the manufacturing and the services components of the Chinese economy were showing a rapid rebound once COVID restrictions eased at the start of the year. So perhaps the risk to this GDP forecast was on the upside, but to see it come in 0.5 percentage point ahead of expectations, yeah, a very positive start for China and indeed for the global economic outlook this year.
It really is, yeah. I mean, are you surprised the oil price hasn't rebounded on this?
Yeah, the oil price, obviously there are many geopolitical factors weighing on that, whether it's the US policy towards its reserves and replenishment there, obviously what OPEC Plus is doing, but you mentioned in your introduction a much clearer transmission through to the mining sector. and those mining names in London that are significant suppliers of raw materials into China, all gaining this morning as well. But yes, all else being equal, you would have expected the oil price to have been positive.
Yeah. Now, what about earnings season? I mean, it's kicked off in the US. We had 3 of the big banks on Wall Street last Friday afternoon. They're ticking through now. Too early to draw any conclusions?
Oh, I think so. It's been a good start, but of the 500 names in the S&P 500 that we'll expect to update over the next month or so, we've had about 35 of those updating so far, including some of those big bellwether banks that you mentioned at the back end of last week. What we've seen so far, around 35 companies have updated. 9 out of 10 of them have bettered market expectations, and it's been quite a sizable beat of earnings forecasts, around 13% on average. So that augurs well for the start of the season. And perhaps slightly goes against the form that was expected. Lots of commentators, and including ourselves, have been expecting a slowdown in corporate profits to come through at some point. We saw them fall slightly in the fourth quarter of last year. We had expected a contraction this year, and we may still get that in the first quarter, but so far bettering expectations quite comfortably.
Yeah, it is fascinating. I mean, on that point, Guy, we've had a rash of bids for mid-caps in this country. Is that because these valuations are just too bombed out, and now people are looking at the earnings potential and thinking it's actually not as bad as we thought?
Yeah, I think many commentators have shone a spotlight on the UK over the last months and years, highlighting that from a valuation perspective, the market as a whole looks very cheap compared to international peers, particularly the US. We always have to be a little bit careful comparing headline index levels between the two different geographies. The composition of the UK market is very different to that of the US. The UK, around 20% of the stock market is oil and gas and mining companies, which tend to attract a far lower PE multiple than the technology that makes up 25% of the US. But even when you look at like-for-like businesses, Procter & Gamble versus Unilever as an example, you still find that the US companies tend to trade on a slight premium to their European counterparts. So yes, with the moves in sterling as well, and private equity having plenty of dry money, as Apollo's recent moves highlight, we're not at all surprised and quite happy to see a bit of a spotlight shone back on some of the value that exists in the UK market.
I bet you are. Yeah. Now, you mentioned index composition there. You've just done some really interesting research on this, the extent to which individual indices are dominated by heavyweight stocks.
Yes, when you get down to the country level, you get some quite unusual situations. And this line of thought as a team was triggered by the move in LVMH last week. LVMH comfortably the largest constituent of the French index. It was up 5% on the back of blowout quarterly results. Again, another indicator of the strength in China, an important end market for LVMH. But that move in LVMH, which is around 15% of the French market, single-handedly meant that the French exchange stood out against its European peers on Thursday of last week as a gainer. So that prompted a bit more analysis into how concentrated are individual European markets. We bemoan the fact that in the UK we've got Astra and Shell, both around 10% of the market. In the US, you have Microsoft and Apple, between them about 15%, but actually that kind of concentration is nothing compared to some of the European markets.
Yeah, Belgium, I think, is one of the big ones. Yeah.
Belgium, where you have ABI, nearly 40% of their domestic market, the top 3 are nearly 60%. Look at the Netherlands and the great success story that is ASML, 35% of that Dutch market as well. So, we think we have problems with a concentrated market in the UK, but some of those European markets are far, far more concentrated.
That's extraordinary. I bet when you came in, you never thought we'd be discussing the Belgian stock market. Guy, good to see you this morning. Thank you. Still to come here on Ian King Live, how AI is being used to improve customer service. Don't go away. Welcome back. Now, this feels like an important moment in the development of artificial intelligence, or AI. It's being incorporated in an increasing number of applications, as we learned earlier on this morning, but it's causing disquiet. A group of tech entrepreneurs led by Elon Musk recently called for a 6-month halt on any research on AI models more advanced than OpenAI's GPT-4, while Ian Hogarth, who's invested in more than 50 AI companies, warned in the Financial Times at the weekend that a future godlike AI, as he called it, could lead to the obsolescence or destruction of the human race in the absence of regulation. Well, joining me now is the AI scientist, Dr. Rasmus Rother, who's also co-founder and chief technology officer at Merentinks. The company describes itself as the world's first concept-to-scale-up ecosystem for AI companies. Rasmus, welcome to you this morning. I mean, it does feel as though AI is developing at a rate of leaps and bounds right now. Is this a more significant moment than it's being given credit for?
No, it's definitely been a moment like you described. I mean, like the last couple of months has been like very accelerating on the AI development side. And I think we will see more exciting developments in the coming months. And it will certainly change a lot of our lives, similarly to how the computer and the internet has changed the working environment. So yes, there will be many changes, and many of them will be for good. They will improve, healthcare, mobility, many areas of the daily lives. But obviously, there are also some concerns, and I think they also need to be addressed.
Well, we'll come on to that in a moment. But I just want to know why you think it is that progress has exponentially accelerated.
I think OpenAI, with the launch of ChatGPT, has really shown a new interface to interact with the AI. Previous language models were also already really good, like even a year ago, 2 years ago. But ChatGPT is just such an intuitive interface that basically many people could easily interact with the AI and realize how good it works. And yes, there have been also some obviously technical improvements in the last couple of months that led to this performance.
How quickly do you expect every company to have to incorporate AI into what they do?
I think every company should look at AI as of today. Like it's already changing when we think about things about like writing texts or emails, marketing, creative work. So yeah, all the companies should look at it now. And yes, it will obviously take a couple of months and years until it's fully adopted, and you need to have it to be fully competitive. But I think like closing your eyes and ignoring it is just wrong at this time.
Now, Germany is emerging as quite a powerhouse in the field of AI. You've, I think, said on record you want Europe to catch up with the US in respect to what it's doing with AI. How quickly can that happen?
So it has to happen. I mean, we've seen that on the cloud computing side, right? Like where the large US tech companies have really had a big advantage and are now so far ahead that it's impossible to catch up for any European cloud provider. And I think something similar might happen on the AI side. I think there we've been also behind. And if we continue to do so if we in the next couple of months and years are not heavily investing into AI as companies, as governments, as research, we'll really fall behind, and that will make us very dependent on other continents in terms of running our country ultimately.
Now, you mentioned disquiet from some quarters towards the growth of AI. I mean, I don't know whether you saw the Ian Hogarth piece in the Financial Times, but this line about godlike AI, is he over-exaggerating?
I think he's exaggerating, but there's a lot of true points in this. Right now, ultimately, the AI, all it does is basically processing a lot of text, images, and data, and then creating a lot of text and images or other types of data. So it's still somehow constrained in what it does. But obviously, if you could imagine a system that somewhat trains him or herself, that gets better over time, that maybe does things the human doesn't fully understand anymore. And I think these are serious concerns. I don't think they will cause problems in the next couple of months, but there might cause pretty big problems in 5 to 10 years. So it's super important that society as a whole thinks about how to deal with it, how to regulate it, what to allow, what not to allow, and how to prosecute it. And so we should start a dialogue. I think we should not move too quickly there because it's such a complex thing. And even talking to experts, I think nobody really has the solution how we can best regulate it and deal with it as a society. But it needs a dialogue, and it's also good that this dialogue is very open, through press and media, and people are working on it.
But from what you've just said, I glean from that you don't want regulation to be too heavy-handed just yet in case it stifles innovation.
Yeah, I think that's a problem we had in the EU before, and also in the UK, right? That we first tried to regulate and then later figure out how to build things, and that is then much more complicated. And so I think there is a few like very obvious use cases for AI in healthcare and mobility. I mean, there's a lot of things that would run better in healthcare and diagnostics if AI was used, or in mobility, less people would die in car accidents. So I think these kind of very good applications that are very high risk at the same time should be allowed, and we should make that there's clear regulation. And I'm not for like more or less regulation, I'm for clear regulation. I think the biggest problem for these concrete use cases is if the regulation is uncertain, and people don't know how to deal with it, because that ultimately makes investors skeptical, makes customers skeptical. So I hope now that as the UK and also the EU are working on the regulation, that they make it as concrete and clear as possible. And there's still some work to do to get there.
All right, Rasmus, we have to leave it there, I'm afraid. Hope to see you again in future. It's been fascinating talking to you today. Thank you.
Thanks.
Now, continuing the AI theme on today's programme, customer satisfaction quite often hinges on the level of customer service received and not just the quality of the product or service. Well, big companies including NatWest and Vodafone outsource their customer service to providers like Genesys, which provides call centre agents and which is increasingly making use of AI. The company claims to have facilitated more than 25 billion customer interactions for organisations in more than 100 countries. Well, I'm joined now by Tony Bates. He's Chief Executive of Genesys, which helps businesses provide customer services. Tony, good to see you this morning.
Good to see you.
How much more are companies spending on this right now? Are you seeing a big uptick in spend?
Yeah, we are actually. Genesys, we do a survey every year of sort of the spend in customer experience. In the last year, we've seen a 25% increase in that spend.
Does it follow, though, that voice recognition, AI chatbots enhance customer service? A lot of people just want to talk to a human being.
Yeah, well, I would say what we see and what we're focused on at Genesys is really it's about a full, personalised, empathetic experience. And so it's not sort of just one form of interaction, it's all of those forms and making sure you do them in the right way at the right time. And so we're really focused on providing that technology. And so I think a lot of what you've seen in the customer service, customer experience space has been very business-centric, but the reality is that we need to become much more people-centric as we move forward.
How can you measure satisfaction from the end user's point of view, which is pretty critical?
Yeah, there are ways of doing it. There's been techniques called Net Promoter Score, where you actually survey after an interaction, after an experience. At Genesys, actually, we have some very innovative technology, which we call the Experience Index. So you really look at it from three lenses. Efficiency and effectiveness, which are important, but come back to what I talked about before, which is really empathy. How did that experience, that real-time moment where you either delight the end customer or you give them a reason to potentially leave, and we actually measure that on a constant basis, and then we use that to train our engineering staff and our products and start to feed that back into some of the AI and the data that we use.
All right, Tony, bear with us, please, just for a moment, because we're going to go to some live pictures that we're seeing now from Moscow, where a court is hearing an appeal against the arrest and detention of the Wall Street Journal reporter Evan Gershkovich. He is about to appear in court, we understand. Evan Gershkovich, of course, very experienced reporter. He's been in Russia for a number of years. Originally has Russian descent from his family, though he isn't, of course, an American citizen. The Wall Street Journal last week upped the ante. It seems that they're not going to allow cameras into the court. This is obviously a highly controversial court case. Evan Gershkovich accused of spying. We understand that he was actually visited in prison yesterday by the American ambassador to Moscow. As I say, very, very controversial. He has been held in one of Moscow's most high security prisons. It's a very, very tough regime. And some of the reporting that the Wall Street Journal has done on this has just emphasised what a tough place it is. Let's see if we can see what happens. There indeed is Evan Gershkovich, the Wall Street Journal reporter. Unfortunately, we've lost the pictures there. We'll try and bring you more on that as soon as we have it. Obviously, this is a critical story on the freedom of the press, so we'll hopefully have more on that for you as we go on. Tony, sorry to interrupt you there. I mean, there are an awful lot of players in this field, the likes of you and Cisco and Avaya. What's the competitive landscape like? Are you seeing more people coming in?
I think we do see people coming in, but really where we differentiate is really, it's about not only some of the technology we just talked about, but really getting people to the cloud. You need to be really nimble and agile, and we're really the leaders on both the global point of view in terms of that, and we have been able to transition many of not only our existing customers, many of our competitive customers towards our next generation cloud technology. I think if you're not focused as a business on moving to the cloud, you're going to have a challenge here. You're going to feel, you're going to sort of be outdated, potentially going to really lose your customers. One of the things that we found last year, we do research in this area. If we found a third of consumers, if they have one bad experience with a business, they're likely to abandon that business. That's pretty shocking when you think about it, but that's because in this experience economy that we live in today, consumers have choice and they're really looking for those incredible, empathetic, personalized experiences.
All right, Tony, I'm sorry about this. Do bear with us. We're going to go back to Moscow for, we've got some more pictures of, here is Evan Gershkovich, the Wall Street Journal correspondent, arrested on charges of spying by the Russians. We can speak now to our correspondent, John Sparks. John, obviously this is the first time we've seen Evan Gershkovich since he was arrested.
That is right, yeah. He is the significance of this is that he is the first American, the first Western journalist, I believe, to have been arrested by the Russian authorities since the Cold War. That is the significance of this. The case today is around his detention, his pre-trial detention, and we can see him here in the dock of the courtroom. He looks relatively relaxed. We'll be speaking to his lawyers there. But this is not about the substance of his charges. That will come later. At the moment, this is about how he is being detained at the moment. He's currently being held in custody at a prison just outside of Moscow called Lefatovo. It's a notorious prison in Russia where traditionally political prisoners have been kept. He has been charged with espionage or spying. He faces up to 20 years in prison if he is found guilty. And what the Russians say is that he was caught red-handed trying to obtain classified material about an arms factory in Yekaterinburg. That's a large city in Siberia, almost 2,000 kilometers to the east of Moscow. And he was arrested on the 30th of March. The last time the newspaper that he works for, the Wall Street Journal, heard from him was just as he was about to enter a steak restaurant. Weren't able to get in touch with him anymore. There we can see him again. He's in the dock. This will be before the case, before the hearing that he's about to appear in. He will be trying to, I would assume his lawyers will be trying to get an alternative custody arrangement for him. He is being held at the moment in a prison called Lefatovo, just outside of Moscow. The Americans have been struggling to get access to him. The US ambassador yesterday was able to see him and said that he was holding up. His spirits were strong. And the US President, Joe Biden, he has talked about this case as well. He has called the detention of Gershkovich as totally illegal. And the State Department, the Foreign Ministry of the US government, they say he has been wrongfully detained. The charges are bogus and that the case is political. And it is possible that the Russians are thinking longer term around a prisoner swap. That has happened in the past. Back in December, they swapped an American basketball player called Brittany Griner, who had been convicted on drugs charges. They swapped her for a notorious arms trafficker called Victor Bout, who was held by the Americans. They did that swap back in December. That could be part of the thinking here. But at the moment, Gershkovich is trying to get alternative detention arrangements at the moment. This is not about the substance of those charges. I think that he is looking, realistically, he's looking at spending a long-term, a significant period of time in a Russian prison at the moment.
The woman in the centre of the picture now in blue, that is Lynn Tracy. She is the US ambassador to Moscow. I mean, it's pretty significant that she's actually there in the courtroom, isn't it?
Yes, it is. It is significant. She did have the opportunity to see him. She was able to gain access to the prison yesterday, and she was able to report that Gershkovich was in good spirits. And Gershkovich has also been able to write to his parents. Said he's been eating properly. He's been able to get some exercise. He's also writing as well. Again, you know, it's significant because it's so rare. He is a journalist for an established newspaper, the Wall Street Journal. They have bureau all over the world. He was hired just before the invasion of Ukraine began. Prior to that, he'd been working to an English language publication in Moscow, the Moscow Times. He's an experienced journalist. He speaks Russian. So he would have been aware of some of the risks and dangers of working in Russia, but obviously significant concerns now, both for his family, for the US government as well, who see him as a political prisoner.
OK, John, thanks for that. And we will have more on that story throughout the morning here on Sky News. Very, very important developing story there now. Now, what are the following have in common? Wakefield Trinity's Bellevue Stadium, the Sandwell Aquatics Centre in Smethwick and Shepperton Film Studios in Surrey. Well, the answer is all of them contain structural steel that was supplied by Billington Holdings, the Barnsley-based structural steel and construction safety solutions specialist. Today, it reported a full-year pre-tax profit of £5.8 million on an underlying basis. That was up from £1.3 million in 2021. Well, joining me now from Barnsley is Billington's Chief Executive, Mark Smith. Mark, very good morning to you. Clearly, you've had a strong year. What are you seeing in the structural steel market right now?
Well, thank you. Good morning. Yeah, we've quite bullied by the results of last year. It was challenging for a start. H2 really was beset with the impact from Ukraine following COVID. But we recovered well during H1, and the volumes have picked up, certainly in certain sectors, during which have remained remarkably strong. And so we're seeing then recovery through H2 22, which has maintained just into 23. So these sectors, which we're specialists in supplying to, and we noticed you were talking about AI and data centres in your earlier piece. We're a supplier into the data centre market, and so currently we've got a number of projects then that run into 23 through to 24, as well as supplying into energy from waste sectors as well. So these markets are providing good confidence going forward. On the back of good results, we see that continuing into 23.
Good to hear. I mean, you've obviously been grappling with inflation, not only elevated energy costs, but also some of the raw materials that go into making steel as well. Are you seeing those pressures starting to abate now?
The steel price escalation has been a concern. We are seeing some stabilisation of steel prices at the moment. The energy costs for most we've seen peak. We've been quite fortunate in so much, call it fortunate or lucky. We managed to fix energy costs at the beginning of 22, so we've missed the major peak, and we're happy to see those on the slide again. More stabilisation gives us a better opportunity going forward. So energy costs are concerned, particularly as they have been for the steel manufacturers. So yeah, they are a pressure. In terms of steel supply, that seems to be more equalised, and following the Ukraine issues where we were having difficulty with certain elements of steel supply, that seems to have equalised as well. And so, again, the future looks set there.
Mark, you buy from all of the major steel producers in the UK. How concerned should people be about the future of steel production in this country?
They've had pressures, it's no mystery. But we're confident that money and investment now is being made by our major steel producer, British Steel. We are a major customer of British Steel, as well as other European and world producers. But we're a big supporter. We are bullied by the fact that supply is now robust. We're seeing good investment, and so, again, more positive.
Now, you also have a very fast-growing division called Hoardit, which is environmental hoardings. What's driving growth there?
I think it's fair to say, yes, the construction market has seen a good volume. And Hoardit trade across all sectors, including residential as well, which buildings and structures tends to stay largely out of. But the product itself is a very innovative, environmentally sound product. And so really, I think their growth has been down on the popularity and the good service provided by Audit.
All right, Mark, I know it's a busy day for your results day. We do appreciate you spending the time to speak to us today. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
That's it from me this morning. There's much more on the Sky News mobile app and on the website with reporting, commentary and analysis from our business team. There's a piece from me right now up there on my interview yesterday with Brian Armstrong from Coinbase. Do have a look at that if you can. Well, there's much more to come after this short break. Jane Secker's going to be in the chair and we will have all the latest for you for that court hearing from the Wall Street Journal reporter Evan Gershkovich. I'll see you tomorrow. Cheerio.